Señor, Señor, do you know where we're headin? Lincoln County Road or Armageddon? Seems like I've been down this way before. Is there any truth in that, Señor? Welcome to Songs of Experience, a Bob Dylan podcast where we explore the man and the music one song at a time. I'm your host, Henry Bernstein. I'm very happy to welcome critically acclaimed, award-winning author of Olive Days and friend, Jessica Elisheva Emerson, here to talk about a beloved signature track off of the fan favorite album Street Legal. Yes, we are talking about 1978's Señor, Tales of Yankee Power. Hello, Jessica.
Hello, thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about this song that I have a particular affinity for.
Oh my gosh. I have to admit, I was a little nervous. I haven't touched Street Legal yet. And I've told many of like my Dylan friends that while I love Street Legal as much as everyone does, I don't feel as knowledgeable in the lore of it. So I felt like I know this album is very important to Dylan fans, and I know this song is, but we're here to talk to you about it. So, I know we know each other from our shared Jewish communal world, and I know you love Bob Dylan, but what is your Bob Dylan origin story?
It's such a good question. So I would say that part of my Bob Dylan origin story is that my parents didn't particularly care for Bob Dylan. They like appreciate Bob Dylan. My mother would say he has a lot to recommend him. He's just not for me. And so when I was growing up, when I was little, the only two songs I really knew were songs that played on my dad's radio station, Lay Lady Lay and like a Rolling Stone. And these were like, and I knew Blowin' in the Wind from camp. I didn't
Mhm.
know it was a Bob Dylan song.
You knew
And
like Peter, Paul, and Mary,
right,
like, yeah.
right. Or I may have even heard, I don't even know if I knew it. We just sang it,
Hmm.
we just sang
Hmm.
it at camp. And when I was in high school, very soon after I got my driver's license, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where we all drove and, couldn't wait to get out of the house and get freedom. I started going to record stores and I met Bob Dylan almost right away in this way. I think probably the first time I went to a record store, I bought a Bob Dylan album.
Hmm.
And I couldn't tell you why, although I do remember after that many of the Bob Dylan vinyl and CD purchases I made and like where I was when I made them.
What was the
But
first
one,
one at that
so
one?
yeah, the first one was Greatest Hits Volume 1.
Perfect. Great way to start.
But not long after that, I got the Biograph collection. And this is actually where I first heard Señor before I
Hmm.
ever heard Street Legal. Later I owned Street Legal,
Hmm.
but I got the Biograph collection and that was it forever. I mean, I was completely enchanted. And so then later read, several biographies and obviously when he came out with his autobiography, I have not seen all of the movies. I have like a nervousness and an anxiety around it, but certainly watched Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, like 100 times when I was a teenager and loved the new movie this year. So it started sort of as soon as I had autonomy.
Wow. So, I mean, the headline here is you're a Bob Dylan super fan. Like you're I always think like greatest hits volume one is a great way to start, like
It's a
to
great
kind
way to
of
start.
and then like deep diving right into Biograph, which was really like when it came out at the time, long, I was three, but he hadn't done, no one had done anything like that, like
Right,
releasing a box set of unreleased stuff. And that
right,
sort of opened the door for obviously bootleg series, but
right.
that's great. How did you come across Biograph?
In the record, Zia Records, this
Uh-huh.
record store in Tucson, it was a CD set that
Uh-huh.
I had, and it was just there, and I had already started buying
That's
Bob
amazing.
Dylan, and I got it, and I was so lucky because I think it was probably my senior year of high school. He came to Tucson, and he played a relatively. I've seen him many times live, not many like you, many for me. Um, a relatively intimate theater. And my parents were so generous. They had bought really good seats, like in the 10th row. And a friend of mine was in the front row and like pulled me up with her. And so the first time I ever saw him live, he wasn't deconstructing all of the songs yet.
Hmm.
And I was in the first row of this intimate venue, and there couldn't have been. I've seen him play in many different ways, but there
Hmm.
couldn't have been a better introduction also to seeing him live than this
Oh my
experience I
God.
had.
What do you remember the date or at least the year?
It must have been, I have a poster on my wall for the second show I saw. Oh, that doesn't have a year. The second time I saw him was at Staples Center in Los Angeles. It was 97, 96 or 97 for sure.
Wow. Oh,
I would think
wow.
early 97.
Just the heart of the never-ending tour
Yeah,
right
right,
there. Oh,
right.
wow. So right around Time Out of Mind. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of sets the bar really high when that's your first your first live experience, Bob Dylan.
It did. And it was one of the best, probably the best time I ever saw him. I don't know what year this would have been. It was at Staples Center, and it was when he was playing with sort of a country band behind him.
Mm,
Can't remember. It would have been the early 2000s. It wasn't that many years later. And that was also tremendous. It was a beautiful concert,
mm,
just amazing. And I've
amazing.
had bad experiences too. I saw him once in LA at the Pantages, and like Merle Haggard opened, and that was the far better part of that
Oh
performance.
no, in
So
'05, really? Oh wow. That's
I was
right.
also really pregnant with my second, and it might have just been too much for me with everybody like smoking inside
Yes.
of this. It just
Yeah.
might have been bad for me. But
Yeah. Yeah. We've all had those experiences. Oh,
yeah,
that's amazing. Well, great origin story. So before we get into the lyrics, I want to briefly just share some stats about the song in case folks don't know about Señor. The song was recorded April 28th, 1978. So we're coming up on the anniversary of its recording at Rundown Studios in Santa Monica, California, released June 15th, 1978. So pretty quick turnaround. Personnel included Billy Cross on guitar, David Mansfield on mandolin and violin. He also appeared on the Rolling Thunder Review. Jerry Sheff, bass guitar, Bobby Hall, percussion, Ian Wallace drums, Alan Pasqua keyboards, Stephen Douglas saxophone, and background vocalists Stephen Souls, and of course Carolyn Dennis, Joanne Harris, and Helena Springs. I mean, the saxophone is what really like drives this album, I think, and Señor is no exception. But Jessica, what's your relationship to Street Legal as a whole, and why this song? Why Señor?
yeah. Controversially, Street Legal, not one of my favorite albums. I love Changing of the Guards,
Mm-hmm.
and I love Senor, and that's kind of it for me. Also, it follows, I should say, it follows one of my favorite albums in 76 is Desire.
That's
And
your
that's
favorite
one of my
album?
favorite, probably start to finish, probably my favorite album. And so it's a little bit hard, although, we come from the Jewish world, and Street Legal is the 18th album, Chai, so that's
Mm-hmm.
like meaningful. Senor enchanted me the moment I heard it. I mean, it's extraordinarily haunting. I love ballads. I love narrative songs. It has
Mm.
what I think are some unique features, even in Dylan has a lot of unique, he has so many songs and so many albums, but it's got the dual bridges that I love. And it's got the backup singing, which hadn't been super common for Dylan, becomes more common, especially like as he goes into sort of the pseudo-Christian era. But it has some really unique features, this song, that just get me. And then it has like a dreamlike quality in addition to being haunting that sort of sweeps me away. But then I would also say I kind of love that you can't distill it down to being around one thing. There are all these people who have like batshit theories about
Right,
what it's about, or particularly what the subtitle means, Tales of Yankee Power.
right.
I think there are some clear through lines, and maybe we'll get into that. I am particularly interested in how this song connects to Billy the Kid
Mm,
and Dylan's own lore, like in 78, 79, 80, as he introduces this song live.
right.
But I really just think it's the sound for me. It's the sound and it's sort of the haunting quality of the lyrics. And maybe, I don't want to diagnose too much, but Jews love to ask questions. This is a question-based song. There are
Hmm.
9 questions in this song, and that probably appeals to me as well.
If you go verse by verse, which we will, for many of the verses, every single line is a question. But I want to, you triggered something for me. So you love this song. Street Legal is not one of your favorite albums, but Desire is. And I over the last few days, when I've been talking to folks about this song, some friends, previous guests on the podcast, Michael Glover Smith and Adam Selzer, they've done a lot of research on Street Legal, and we all sort of agreed that there's something about Señor that seems like it actually might belong on Desire.
Desire, yeah.
Do you feel that too?
Yes,
It,
although there's these some of these crossover elements
hmm
between it does sort of serve as a bridge between Desire and sort of what comes next for
hmm
Bob Dylan.
hmm
But I do feel like Senor. I think Sarah is an incredibly haunting song.
Hmm.
I think some of the underlying melody in Hurricane connects to some of the way, so like some of the musicality of Señor. So yeah, I definitely, and then there's a clear connection between Romance and Durango,
Yeah.
and this song. So yes, that's very interesting. I've never talked to anybody about that before, but it definitely feels like it fits with this all-time favorite album of mine.
It's sort of cinematic, the song,
Mm.
in the way that in that the first question is, do you know where we're heading? And then actually gives a couple possibilities,
Yeah.
right? And those are two like extreme possibilities. I live right off of Lincoln Avenue here in Chicago, so
Do you?
yeah, I don't
Well, I
live near
have
Armageddon, but
well, I have an interest. Well, we can get into this more, but there's this thing that happens in the late 1800s, the Lincoln County War, and it relates to Billy the Kid. And so Billy the Kid is clearly on his mind during this period. He shot this movie. But my oldest son went to school for a time in New Mexico. It's now called Chavez County, but in Lincoln County, it's the same county. It was just renamed. And so I have sort of an obsession. I'm also from Arizona, so I have a whole obsession with like the Billy the Kid
will you say more about
anyway.
that? Let's just get right into it.
Sure. So I think he opens the song with these two options in this Lincoln County War. So I don't want to get it totally wrong. It's like 4 years. It's not a war. It's an Old West thing. It happens in New Mexico, which is a territory then, and it's between like merchants and cattle traders, but it's a very violent time. And Billy the Kid is mixed up in this. It's sort of actually where he gets his reputation, and then eventually he's hunted down by Pat Garrett, the sheriff, that's the story sort of in the Sam Peckinpah movie
Right.
that Bob Dylan is in. But he's clearly got it on his mind. They shoot that movie in Durango, and on
Hmm.
Desire he's got Romance in Durango, and
And then
so
on
and
Rolling Thunder review, he says, "Remember Durango, Larry?"
right, right.
Yeah.
And I'm from Arizona.
Yeah.
Billy the Kid hung out in Arizona as well. Actually, one of my favorite covers of Señor is partially done by Tucson band, the Willie Nelson
Mm.
Calexico
Mm.
cover, which I
Hmm.
really love, and Calexico is a Tucson band. So I just feel like I was sort of steeped that this song maybe is steeped in the place that I'm from, and that also appeals to me about it. I'm a little bit I'm a daughter of the West, and I love thinking about sort of the Wild West and the frontier and these stories that unfolded. So I love that in the hook of this song, he's already calling out this very specific moment in a very bloody moment in Wild West history. So I love that. And if you think of it that way, if you think maybe well he's talking about a war or Armageddon, it might not be as stark of a like two bad options.
Yeah. Right. Right. By the way, Calexico, they're amazing, and they're no stranger to Bob Dylan, as you said, covering
No,
Señor. They do some of the music in a complete unknown. I like did some digging and figured out once we were able to pause it and listen to it over and over again. And I just wanted to give them like a shout out. Like they're like the coolest lovers of Bob Dylan. That's
I
so awesome
I
that you're a
love
fan of them.
I love them. They're amazing. So I have an uncle who's still alive. His name is Billy Saddlemeyer. He goes by Billy Said, who was like very tied into the Tucson music scene. He was in this
Hmm.
band called Giant Sand that had some notoriety and tied into some of these other people. And so I was very lucky to grow up. I didn't grow up around Calexico, but just to grow up sort of a little bit immersed in the local music scene. And so I've loved Calexico for a very long time. And that their cover of Señor is in I'm Not There.
Right. They're incredible. Señor, do you know where she is hiding? How long are we going to be riding? How long must I keep my eyes glued to the door? Will there be any comfort there, Señor? So this is the one that has four questions right in a row, just in time for Passover.
Taisa.
Like all of a sudden now we've got sort of a double mystery. We don't know who Señor is, and we don't know who's hiding, who the she is, and then how long we're gonna be like. There's just so many questions here. What do you make of this stanza?
Well, I write almost exclusively. I guess I write about women's desire and visible women, but almost all my stories feature obsessive love. So for me, this places Senor in the world of an obsessive love story, and that's just sort of how I filter the world. I love thinking about obsessive love. So that really draws me in because, first of all,
Mm,
a couple of bad options. It's kind of a haunting melody. And then, like, yay, it's also a love story. So I do think for me, that's an important part of it. That breaks down with a lot of people think Señor is maybe God
mhm.
because, and I don't really, in some later stanzas, I do think there are some, overtly religious elements.
Mhm.
I don't really care if Señor is God or not. I think it's a love story.
Well, so who is the she here? Is the narrator who's singing this song looking for this person, do you think?
That's what
Okay.
I think. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's
Uh-huh.
what I think.
Interesting. Whatever that waiting for that person is, whether it's just sitting there staring at the door till they come home, or on a long road looking for them everywhere, this person
Right.
is waiting. Where do you think the comfort is that the narrator is talking about then?
I'm suspicious that there's going to be any comfort,
Mhm.
Henry. I don't, I'm very suspicious that there's going to be any comfort. Like, it's fine that
Like
he
the
asked the
answer to that
question,
question
but
is
I think,
no.
I think it's rhetorical. I think it's
Yeah, of
rhetorical.
course. It's
Definitely not. And she probably doesn't want to see you,
right.
is my thought. So I don't
Which,
think there's going to be any comfort.
that sort of plays into what, a lot of later Bob Dylan songs in sort of modern times of like these sort of murder ballads and, one way to look at Make You Feel My Love, which is, of course, on your Olive Days playlist on your website, you can check out, is one way to look at that. I think most people, when it's been covered, Adele and et cetera, has covered it as just a
Garth
straight
Brooks.
Garth Brooks. Yeah, it's just a straight up love song. But it could be like an obsessive person who's like going to force this person to love them, like a
Yeah, I
kidnapper
know
or
you haven't
something.
made your mind up yet.
Right.
Like, give him a chance.
Yeah. So I think there's, that's certainly something that Bob explores throughout his career, that sort of like, thing that you're interested, that obsessive nature of love. And sometimes it goes over the edge a little bit or goes right to the
Yes,
edge, right? As Bob
right.
says.
And it
Um,
sounds to me
yeah.
like in this case, it definitely did.
Right, and that goes with the sort of cowboy southwestern motif. Jessica, in the acknowledgments of Olive Days, you wrote, "If I didn't have the brilliance of Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen ringing in my headphones, I wouldn't have gotten past page 2 for your book." And in Lilith magazine, you said, "I idolize Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, who both sing about God. In other words, some of the people I love and respect the most, and with whom I choose to spend much of my time, believe." I thought those were such amazing quotes. First of all, just that you love Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen. And the way I interpreted they're always in your headphones is that they're also always just kind of swirling around in your head. Is that fair?
Totally fair. And the book I'm writing now, which is going much faster than Olive Days because it's very incentivizing to sell a book, is
Okay.
actually about an aging American
Oh.
Jewish folk singer.
Oh.
It's set in contemporaneously, but that's what it's about.
Oh my God. Okay, we'll have to
Yeah.
come back to that. The fact that you also said these guys sing a lot about God, and here there's that idea that maybe Señor is the padre, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you famously talked about atheism and how you reconcile loving these two great singers who sing about God, but also, that's not something that's for you personally. I promise this is leading somewhere. Where Bob goes right after the
Right.
Christian period, which is a very specific version of believing in God. Where does that whole period land for you as a fan of the whole canon?
I'll start by saying I think what resonates for me the most with both of these artists is that they're wrestling with God. And I think one thing that people don't always consider about atheists is that many of us, I couldn't speak for all of us, many of us perhaps spend even more time wrestling with God and the ideas around God than somebody who's a believer and
Mhm.
just and takes it at face value. So I relate very much to that. And in Leonard Cohen, you see it. He spends a lot of time studying Eastern religions in his life. He lives in a monastery for a period. And in Bob Dylan, you see it in a number of ways, right? Certainly with the Christian period, but then all of the years I lived in LA, or many of them, he had an aliyah at a local Chabad every
Yes.
year at the Chagim, right? So I think you see it in both of them that they're wrestling with God, and that resonates with me completely. So
Mhm.
it doesn't matter to me as much where they land at various parts of their their sort of journey. I will then say, writ large, the religious Christian period is not my favorite
Oh,
period
really? Interesting. Okay.
of Bob Dylan. We get to self-portrait and I really love it. But I kind of like Gotta Serve Somebody. I
Mm,
listened to that a lot as a
mm,
teenager. And by then I was pretty entrenched in my own atheism. And also I still think the song is true, right?
hmm.
It's true even outside of like a Jesus paradigm.
You've
Um,
probably you've probably heard it live if you've seen Bob, do
I
it, and
have
it
heard it live.
and
I
then
think only once. I think
mhm.
only once.
Yeah, for me, I took the whole canon in at once, and so that period is I love all those albums in different ways. Certainly not my favorite era, but I love it. I love it all. And I think intellectually there is a part of me that as a Jewish boy from the Midwest, had I been a Bob Dylan fan in 1979, I feel like I
Yep.
probably would have been hurt that this was the path he had chosen and wouldn't have
Yes.
been able to like intellectually be like, this is really good music. But now it's just all good. I just like
I
it.
wonder about my parents actually.
Have you ever asked them
Particularly, I
about
wonder
that?
about my mother. So I think my mom has made sort of comments about that period of time, maybe like expressed skepticism. We haven't really dug into it. I will tell you that there is a more explicit story about Billy Joel. We grew up big Billy Joel fans in my house, a lot of Billy Joel. And my dad and my mom went to a concert once and people, threw things up on the stage and he picked up a penny and said, well, like I'm a Jew, something like I'm a Jew. So of course I'm going to take this. And then my mom was like done with him. And
Whoa.
it was really challenging for her. I'm not saying she never listened to another Billy Joel song, but it was very challenging for her that he made a Jewish joke on stage. And so I presume that that's part of the complicating. I also just don't think she likes listening to his voice. I think she very much appreciates his protest songs and what he's lent to the culture and that she has children who love him. It's just not for her. But my guess would be that the Christian phase is complicating because she was
Right.
in it.
Right. What people who are, let's say, uneducated on Bob Dylan, who are much older than me, and when learn that I'm a Bob Dylan fan to the extent that I am, usually because I'm always wearing a Bob Dylan t-shirt of some kind. But, and they'll say something to the effect of, "Oh, but didn't he convert to Christianity?" And I'm like, that was like in 1979, like, and
Right,
that only lasted until 1983. Like,
right,
what? Like, did you just stop
right. They're
gathering
just focused
information
on it.
about this
Right,
person at
right,
that point?
right.
Yeah. I like, and I haven't really dug deep with, I guess, Jewish fans who have been fans since the 60s and run through that. I maybe that's for another time. But you mentioned that you have seen Bob Dylan live. So, this song has been played 265 times live. First time June 1st, 1978 in Los Angeles, and the last time so far, April 27th, 2011 in Sydney, Australia. So, not
Wow.
a one-off, but definitely
Yeah.
a rarity deep cut in the modern era. Like if you heard a Señor, you could tell your friends, I heard a Señor,
Yeah,
right?
I have not. I have
You have
not
not.
heard a
Okay, that
Señor.
was my question. Have you ever seen Bob Dylan
No,
live? Yes. And have you ever heard a Señor?
no. My brother-in-law once, I can't remember what my sister and brother-in-law went to, but they're sort of like Silicon Valley folk and they get big opportunities. And they went to some thing where Bob was being honored and a live cover. Bob didn't play it, a live cover of it was played. And I remember that my brother-in-law said, my God, we heard Señor. It was amazing. So even in the form of a cover, I think it's a rarity. Although if you go and listen to a lot of versions, as you may have done for this podcast,
Yes.
I feel like he played it a lot live
Yeah.
between 78 and 80, a
Yeah.
lot. And
Yes.
it changes. He plays it even in a 3 year span really, really differently. My
Hmm.
favorite version is a live Portland version in 1980 that's sort of stripped down.
Hmm.
My favorite live version. I actually this is also controversial. Some people like live versions better. I love the studio cut. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's funny. I listened to as we were chatting offline the other day. I listened to a ton of Senior, and I never got sick of it once. I was like, okay, next
Right.
one. I
Yeah.
probably have, just even in my Apple Music, I think I counted. I had ready to go 45 versions
Yeah,
of it.
yeah,
I'd
yeah.
probably listened to a little more than half of them, but I still kept coming back to the studio version. There is something so surprising about it. Someone said to me that the saxophone in it does what the violin does in Hurricane. Like it's just this
Mm,
thing that keeps drawing you in and drawing you in and drawing you in. And so I agree with you. I think I prefer the studio
yeah,
version too. Of
I
course,
do too.
the most famous live version,
78.
I would say December 10th, 1978 in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So Bob introduces it with a very famous description of what this is about. Jessica, I have it in front of me. Would you read it for us if I share my screen here?
Yeah, share your screen. I'd be happy to.
Great.
I was riding on a train one time from Durango. I can't do, I can't do the little like the
Yeah.
laughs. I was riding on a train one time from Durango, Mexico to San Diego. I fell asleep on the train and woke up in this town called Monterey. And there was, I guess it was about past midnight, not too much happening, but just maybe around that time. And a family was getting off the train. An old man was stepping up on the platform to get up on the train. And he came down the aisle and took a seat across the aisle from me. Meantime, the train was still in the station. Anyway, I was watching this whole thing through the window, which was turned into a long mirror. And finally, I felt a strange vibration, and I had to turn to look at this man. He wasn't wearing anything but a blanket. So I turned my head to look at him. Both his eyes were on fire. I could easily see that. And there was smoke coming out of his nostrils. I said, well, this is the man I had to talk to. So I turned back to look out the mirror again. I finally got up the courage to talk to him. And then the train started moving and the conversation went something like this. And then he starts,
Right.
Señor. Yeah.
Amazing. So, I mean, there's just so much to think about here. I think number one, this is probably bullshit, but
Total bullshit.
maybe it
Well,
isn't.
he told this story a lot of times. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know this, and it
Yeah.
became like increasingly unhinged,
Right.
right? So
Right.
he started and there was like a guy, and eventually like fire coming. And I love how he's like, there's fire. I could easily see that there was fire coming out of his
Right.
eyes.
He's telling his own Bible story,
Right,
basically, and
right,
it's, anyone who's seen Bob Dylan live or just heard him in interviews, like this man loves to lie. It's,
right,
it's one of his
right,
great features is his ability and skill level at saying things that are complete bullshit. And look
right.
at, the Rolling Thunder Review movie, which, it's bullshit. And
Totally.
yet it's so entertaining. And the idea that Bob would want to introduce it in this way and create some lore about it sort of goes with the theme of the song, this sort of
Right.
mystical story that who knows where it comes from. And he might have been on a train one time. We know he was in
Sure.
Durango, Mexico. Maybe he did take a train too, and maybe he did see a guy, and then that sparked the thing.
Sure. And you have to assume I assume as a writer, so observation is my greatest skill. And an interesting thing about me is I can meet somebody like 32 times and not remember their name, which is terrible and embarrassing, but I could remember how many times they tap their foot or I won't know what hand somebody writes with, but I could recreate the way they speak, like their dialect and their tics. And so to be a writer, you have to be an observer. So there's no doubt that an observation might have led to this. I also think the really interesting thing about this intro is the mirror because it brings into question a theory that some people have, which is that there's only one person in this train compartment ever, and it's him, and it's an alter ego or some piece of himself that he's struggling with, and that's not explicit anywhere in the song. In the song, it feels very much like there are two characters interacting, although I think it could spark your imagination. But I think it's very interesting that he talks about the mirror twice in this intro. And also, that might have been a one off for him. And I'm sitting in my car or in my living room being like, oh, there's only one dude. But
Right, right, right. Well, like you said, there he changed the story a lot, but he also introduced it in other ways. Dylan Untold says, more reliable, however, seems to be a rare outpouring of candor in July of 1978. Bob said, this song is inspired by a man, Harry Dean Stanton. Some of you may know him. So we know that they were in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid
right,
together. And so again, that connection is just like runs so deep. There's something about that movie and the experience that he had on the movie.
he's obsessed.
Yeah. Yeah, and so maybe he did write it about Harry Dean Stanton. I mean, Harry Dean Stanton keeps popping up throughout Bob Dylan's career. The Chabad Telethon.
Yeah. Yes.
They're in a little band together, and
Big
uh,
yarmulke.
Big Yamaka. He's
Usually I would only say Kipa, but I feel like that one is
That's a
that's got a yarmulke.
yarmulke. Yeah, and he's in the video years later for Dreaming of You.
Oh, I didn't
It-
know that.
oh, you should check out that video.
I'm going to.
Yeah, it was done as like promotion for Telltale Signs, and then when they released Fragments, they sort of re-released it.
That's interesting. The whole question of, is he inventing it? Does he even remember how
Mhm.
he wrote this song? Because we were talking about Leonard Cohen a moment ago, and one thing that I can't stop thinking about with Leonard Cohen, one of my favorite songs is the song called "Famous Blue Raincoat," and
Mhm.
it's also a haunting song. It's a narrative song. It's told in the form of a letter. And later on, when Leonard Cohen is interviewed on the BBC, he's like, I don't know what it was about. Was it about my marriage? Maybe. Was it about a love triangle I heard about? Possibly. And it's just almost impossible to believe. Like, is it misdirection? Or really, is it, that he doesn't know and he's been telling a story for so long that he doesn't even remember where it came from?
At a certain point, does the law, what becomes fiction and what's
Right.
real? Again, in '78, he might have had like another slip about where an innocent slip about what the song came from. He said, "This is a new song written about 6 months ago through the southern part of the northern part of the states." Anyway, it's entitled "Tales of Yankee Power." He might not know where this
Right.
came from, and
Right.
he talks about. I mentioned this on almost every single episode, so I'm so sorry, but and I'm obsessed with it in that interview with Ed Bradley when he talks about you try to write those songs, there's a kind of magic, not a Siegfried and Roy magic. And he's talking about specifically this song in the 60s, the song from the period of a complete unknown. But I think this kind of thing is magic. Like, where did this song come from? It's so bizarre. It's so different tonally from the rest
So
of
different.
and sonically from the rest of Street Legal, but seems to fit in. And like you said, is a good bridge to Desire, but it
Yeah.
wouldn't fit exactly on Desire either. It's sort of its own thing. And where did it come from?
And it's a bridge. Yeah, it's a bridge to what comes next too. I mean, I think some of the religious imagery in it is it's sort of a clue in. We will go through more of the lyrics. There's like an iron cross, but I actually think there's some
Yeah.
other stuff that's pretty specifically Christian in this song. Yeah, where did it come from? But
Well,
he
yeah.
wrote songs. I mean, he wrote songs like "How I Sneeze," right? What is "Idiot Wind" the one he like wrote in a taxi cab on the back of a napkin because he was so angry about some gossip that had been happening? Like, may we all be so lucky just once in our life
I know.
to have a situation like that.
I know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff at the Bob Dylan archive, a lot of napkins, a lot of hotel
Yeah,
stationery, a lot of his kids' stationery, like, from the desk of Jesse Dillon, Bar Mitzvah,
yeah,
19, whatever. And that he's written stuff on this, like you said, this guy sneezes and it's
right.
Señor comes out. But
It's unbelievable.
you said the bridge between Desire and Street Legal. And speaking of the bridge, the song doesn't really have a chorus. Like you said, it has two bridges. So
Right.
this first one, there's a wicked wind still blowing on that upper deck. There's an iron cross still hanging down from around her neck. There's a marchin band still playing in that vacant lot where she held me in her arms one time and said, "Forget me not." Oh, that last part's like so romantic,
I know.
But
And I think it's a
yeah.
call out to I think it's a call out to Visions of Johanna, which is actually I think probably my favorite Bob Dylan single of all times because there's an empty lot
Mm.
in that song as well, and that's a romance.
Yeah, I love that.
Sorry, you were gonna say.
No, I was just gonna. I wanted to get into the Iron Cross, but I mean, let's go with Visions of Joanna. I would never have made that connection, but that's an incredible. I mean, he does a lot of intertextuality stuff,
Yes,
right? Like referencing,
yes.
but that goes way back to one of his most magical songs.
Blonde on Blonde.
That's the song that made me realize I need to go deep into Bob Dylan.
Yes, I truly think it's a single. I know that people will say like Rolling Stones the greatest rock and roll song of all time. Maybe who am I to judge? But it's very hard to say I have a favorite song. So I always think of Dylan songs in different ways. The one
Mm.
I've probably listened to the most on repeat is "I Want You." I mean, over and over and over and again at different parts of my life. But
The
I think
Budokan version or blood on blood?
blood on blood,
Okay.
blood on blood. But but Visions of Johanna is probably like my top single.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that and it has this line in the empty lot where the ladies are playing blind man's left with the keychain, and he does this intertextual play, and I love that this song has a call out to what I think is his greatest.
Do you think that there's, in terms of like writing, is there some sort of narrative connection between the two, or is it just referential? Like, could that story continue from one to this lot? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I've thought of it that way, but I definitely think of it as a clue that it's also sort of a romance.
mhm.
In its way, I think there are a lot of themes in Señor. I don't think it's only a romance, but I think at the core of the story, he's trying to get to a woman.
I think if we, there's a there's sort of a like a danger with Bob Dylan. Like if you start, when you open up that peak
Correct.
that curtain of like, are these songs connected? Like in that
Right.
first line, we've got wicked wind,
Right.
idiot wind, still blowing in the wind. Like
Right.
he's at a certain point he just runs out of words, I think,
Right. That's true. There are
or
only so many.
right, there are only so many words. The Iron Cross. So you say obviously it's like it's clearly has some sort of Christological nature to it, but you're saying maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's
No,
something
I think
else.
it, no, I
Oh,
definitely think it does. I think that there are other um I think there are other even stronger, less maybe overt Christian references in the song. Later on,
mm.
you get to overturn these tables, and of course,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think everybody else's theories are batshit, and then I'm like, well, that's definitely about Jesus.
Jesus in the temple. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But I really do feel like that's kind of I feel like it foreshadows what comes next from the gospel backup singing
Mm.
to the Iron Cross to the overturn these tables. I think they're to the idea it could not have been unknown to Bob that in Spanish, Señor is a word for God. I definitely don't think that that's the case. I think it was known to him. I'm not convinced the song is about God, but I think there are some really overt and quite beautiful like pieces of Christian imagery.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if I mean, there's no indication that he was already going down that road, and he's been very well read in, you know, both uh the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and the Christian Bible
Yes.
for a long time at this point. So I think, and there's just so many good like things to, we know he loves taking stuff from different places and smashing them all together.
Yeah.
He loves doing that stuff. So he could be just picking stuff
Yes,
from,
for sure.
but to your knowledge, is there something specific about from the Bible or some sort of iconography specific to Iron Cross? Like I know that's like a symbol of like some not nice people also.
Yes.
So, but what to your
I
knowledge, is that a thing? Like I actually
I
don't
read
know.
it I read it more as like as I
Like it's
read it
heavy.
more as a shout out. It's heavy, right?
Okay.
It's heavy and the types and it relates to the Southwest. Right? The types of things I see around me in the Southwest
Mm,
often are made out of metal, often heavy metal, often dark metals,
mm,
either really light like shiny silver or dark metals. So I
hmm
do think it's an extremely resonant sort of Southwestern image, but what I mostly think is that it's heavy.
mm.
And iron relates to blood. I mean, people write papers on stuff like this. I
Hmm.
but I actually don't think you can get to where this song goes without that line. I think it's kind of a line that the rest of the song hinges on. It kind of stops you in your tracks when you're
Mm.
when you're listening to it. It's extremely,
It's,
extremely powerful.
yeah,
I feel
it's
like you
jarring.
feel the weight of it. You feel the weight
Yes.
of it when you listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Señor, Señor, I can see that painted wagon. I can smell the tail of the dragon. Can't stand the suspense anymore. Can you tell me who to contact here, Señor? I love the way he says suspense. That's
Yes,
that's like my favorite thing. Painted wagon, tail of the dragon. That is a Bob effing Dylan rhyme right there.
it totally is. It's one of my favorite lines, and I will be honest about myself. Tail of the Dragon is definitely a heroin reference. I'm not saying it was for Bob.
Oh.
I don't see any way around
Oh,
it
like
because it's like a
chasing the dragon or
chasing
something?
the tail of the
The
dragon
dragon.
when you yeah, like the vapor moves around in the foil in
I see.
kind of like an undulating way, and that's
Okay.
so the tail of the dragon. And when you're 17 and you're maybe not using heroin but having a good time with other street drugs, that's extremely captivating as well. And so I will say that that particular line I would think about over and over and over again. And actually, to the extent that a line from this song gets stuck in my head, there are a couple, and this is definitely one of them. Painted Wagon, Tail of the Dragon. Yeah,
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and is Painted Wagon, is that like a that's kind of like a very much a Southwestern cowboy.
that's yes, yes. Although maybe you'll have a listener who's like, actually, that's a whole other thing. But I just think of it as kind of yeah, it's like a Southwestern or
I'm
Oregon Trail,
picturing
like
the Oregon
Westward
Trail. Yeah.
Ho. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, Westward Ho kind of thing.
Totally. But it's cool that he drops the tail of the dragon in here because you're sort of by this point we're in the Southwest, I think, where that's the vibe I'm getting. And then all of a sudden the tail of the dragon, that's like a whole other
Right,
type
you're
of
in
imagery.
fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, which is also a good clue, right? Even without the intro where a guy's eyes are on fire. It's like a pretty good clue in this song that not everything is as it seems.
Mhm. The way he says can't stand the suspense anymore, that's such a good like little vocal trick to fit the word in the rhythm. Because if you instead if he was like can't stand the suspense anymore, then you're
Right,
drawing out ents and it just doesn't sound as
right.
good. But he knows to go
He knows.
suspense. So the
It's
up
so
singing
interesting because,
goes
like,
way back.
in country music, I hate when singers do that, but somehow in this song, I'm like, oh,
Yeah, I know.
be still my heart.
Oh, I know. And there's a little bit of suspense here too in the song. You sort of feel what the narrator is feeling, and then the narrator doesn't even know where to go or who to talk to. Like they're
Right,
completely lost.
and it never lifts. There's no resolution in this song, which as a writer I really love. There's
Mm,
resolution in the fact that the narrator is like ready to move on.
mm,
He goes to a bad place and he's ready to move on, but there's no resolution to the suspense at the end of the song.
mhm.
And that's great. That's right. That keeps the listener guessing.
Is so okay, so you said as a writer you love that there is unresolved ending in a narrative story. Is that something you want? You don't want there to be a resolution in the end? Is that because you want
Well,
like to write more, or is that like what is that about?
so I don't think most things in life wrap up with a tidy bow. And so I'm pretty interested in stories that also don't. I think if every story that I read or listened to didn't have a resolution, that would also become exhausting.
Mm.
But then you find it to be surprising and unique when you have a story that doesn't come to a resolution. Or maybe, Henry, I'm just telling that to myself because some people hate the end of my book, which is very vague and doesn't have a clear resolution that people like. And I thought it was the only possible resolution for my characters. Just like I think it would be extremely disingenuous if Bob Dylan had a last verse of this song that was like, found her, So, so maybe it's just me.
Yeah, maybe that's just your style. I mean, are you saying that Rena is gonna appear in Olive Day? Rena will return. So
Arena, I'm so sad to tell you that she doesn't, but
yeah.
Will has a little cameo in the book I'm writing now. So
Okay.
it's about a very famous folk singer, and he takes this new love of his on a tour of his art collection in his home. He collects like Los Angeles and California art, and he
Mhm.
has several original Will Ochoas, so you know that he has made it in that way. But
Oh.
Rena is pretty invisible in the world, so
Oh.
sadly, no.
Okay. Well, but you have established now the Emerson verse then. If
I have an Emerson verse.
yeah.
Unfortunately, the third book I'm going to write is going to be like in a whole different reality where like labor prevailed in the 60s. But at least for two books, I've got an Emerson verse.
So that we get to the second bridge, and this is where I feel like the song gets really heavy in terms of both story and emotion and narrative. Well, the last thing I remember before I stripped and kneeled was the trainload of fools bogged down in a magnetic field. A gypsy with a broken flag and a flashing ring said, "Son, this ain't a dream no more. It's the real thing." Before you made that, move of, oh my gosh, be still my heart, Bob. If this were a movie, the actor would be chewing on the scenery here or making a meal out of this scene. I mean, this is
The
just
stakes are very high. The
mhm.
stakes are very, very high, higher than I would say in many songs. Although Bob Dylan has a unique, a unique song catalog because there's so much murder.
Yes, yes.
But generally speaking, I would say very high stakes for a song in this second bridge,
Hmm.
and it's beautiful,
Hmm.
and it sort of keeps this dreamy, or some people might say trippy quality. The last thing I remember. But what I mostly think about the second bridge is the stakes go way up, and that is the mark of great storytelling.
Mm.
If you were not sure about this song by the time you reach the second bridge, first of all, shame on you. But also like now you're in it because you got to know. You
Is
got to
this
know.
the climax of are we at the peak right now of the
No,
song, of the story?
well, there's definitely a clear denouement. Like the
Mm.
end is, I think, is a clear denouement. I think we're at, I don't know, in a classic plot structure, if this might be like second plot point.
Hmm.
Um,
Mm.
maybe
Hmm.
because I actually think, maybe though, because don't we go straight from this into give me a minute, let me get it together.
Yes,
So
yes, yes, yes.
maybe this really is the climax. I mean, it's and musically it's extremely dramatic.
I mean,
Extremely
yes,
dramatic.
certainly, yeah, and the horns are really coming up here. But I mean, it's so vivid, the imagery here, like picturing this person stripped and kneeled. It's like, have they rent their clothes and are they praying? Are they held captive somewhere
Right.
and
Are
being
they torched?
tortured? Yeah, like what? The last thing they remember, what have they been unconscious this whole
Right.
time? Like, what is happening to this person? Last I checked, we were just looking for his his long lost love,
Right. Right. Or like, did he eat some peyote buttons? Like, I think
Right.
there are a lot of great there are a lot of possibilities here. But and also, I don't know, there's a very interesting magnetic field. I don't know what that means. And but
Does
it's pretty
Bob know what
magical.
that means? Like, I feel like that's a
No,
very,
probably
like, he must have
not.
heard that word on Star Trek or something.
Yeah, or I actually, this line always makes me think of a Tim O'Brien book, which is
Mm.
funny because actually one of the famous covers of this song is by a different Tim O'Brien, a grassroots musical artist, and it's a beautiful version.
The
But Tim
Red on
O'Brien,
Blonde album, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Oh, so you're talking about a different Tim O'Brien? That's
different Tim
amazing.
O'Brien. Yes. So Tim O'Brien, a writer who's mostly famous for writing about Vietnam, has this
Okay.
book, I think, underrated book called The Nuclear Age, where a guy is kind of unhinged, or is he? And he's digging a hole in his backyard because like the nuclear age is coming. And he has all of these theories. And the whole time you read the book, I think you're supposed to think like, he's full of shit, but also like maybe not. And this line always reminds me of that particular book. Like, it doesn't even matter to me what it means. It sounds pretty important, you know? And I don't really know actually what the gypsy line means either.
Yeah.
And I don't, and broken flag could be, the whole thing is about a train. The whole thing is set within the context of a train ride. So it could relate to that. But for me, it doesn't really matter because the last line is, this ain't a dream no more. It's the real thing. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. And it's the gypsy who says it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. And we don't really know where in time that is, if it
Right.
relates to the train ride, if it's a thing that previously happened. Like, we don't actually know temporally where we are, but it's so terrifying because we're inside of a song that I would say is famously dreamlike.
Hmm.
And then we get this line that it's actually not
It's
a
not a
dream.
dream.
This is
Yeah.
all real. Yeah.
Yeah, when I look at the words here, the image that comes to me is so much different than the drama of listening to it because that's like musically that's like the peak, the climax of the song, that last line. But if you're just reading it, like one way to look at it is, she's putting her hand gently on his shoulder and saying, like breaking the news to him, like you're not dreaming anymore. This is real. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to tell you that. There's it's like a sort
Wow.
of motherly when I read it, it just not certainly not musically.
And I want to push back because although I think that it is in many ways, you've made a good case that it's the climax, the second to last line of the song. So like his vocals on this place don't make sense to me no more, where he goes like way up high.
Yeah.
I, so it's not like it doesn't sort of remain elevated because I think that second to last line is like mind blowing. It kind of it gets quiet in the verse that we're like after the second bridge, it gets a little quiet, but then he like blows it out of the park.
Oh yeah. Oh
Before
yeah,
he
yeah, yeah.
brings it, yeah, yeah, yeah.
When he does that octave change, he does it at the beginning of the song too, but it's so
Yes,
surprising. I should have mentioned
right.
that earlier. And you're right. I that musically there is that kind of climax for sure. And I mean that's the point of when you're singing, when you have the ability to sing in two different octaves at two different points in the song, that's the point of it. It like raises the stakes
Right, right.
emotionally and musically. Before we get into the last two
Yeah,
verses.
please.
So 7 years after the 1978 performance on Biograph, which you mentioned, it's so amazing that you mentioned Biograph. Dylan comments on the song as he's talking to Cameron Crowe. He says, "Señor was one of them border type things: Nuevo, Laredo, Rio Bravo, Brownsville, Juarez. I don't know, sort of like Lost Yankee on gloomy Sunday Carnival Embassy type of thing. The unforgettable wench, not a friend in the world, all messed up for something like, say, a murder charge, having to pay for sins that you didn't commit when all the while you were getting away with murder. So it all evens out in the end. Sometimes you'll write something because you've lived something, and you someplace along the line say to yourself, why am I writing this? It will never be as good as I lived it. But then it
Wow.
sometimes turns out better than you've lived." And he goes on a little bit more. And when I read it, I can obviously, that was in 85, but I read that in my mind in like theme time radio hour Bob. Like that is grizzled Bob taking all those little things and smushing them together, and the murder charge, listing all the
Right, right.
places.
It's bananas.
So
Um,
so again, I'm not sure I think this song, like many of his songs, has changed for him over time, maybe.
Probably, but I think it probably still falls in like a in like a piece of his imagination, right? There are things that he's obsessed with throughout his entire career: boxing,
Mm,
um, the West,
mm,
murder, injustice, and I think that goes far beyond the like early protest
mhm,
songs
mhm,
and
mhm.
well and right like any all sort of forms of injustice. And this is a song that's rooted in the West, and even in that sort of like monologuing he did with Crow, that's clearly tied to to the West and sort of
Oh
the
yeah.
idea of the frontier and the idea of manifest destiny and the idea of lawlessness and like what are the repercussions for the individual in a society that lacks law or
Hmm.
the enforcement of law or
Hmm.
where the law is corrupt. So I think it's really interesting. I also personally I loved the beginning of that piece. So one of the interesting features of Tucson, Arizona is that we have this place called Old Tucson Studios. Not a very active movie studio anymore, but at one time was so active that there's a mountain. I live in a valley in Tucson surrounded by mountains, and there's a specific mountain peak behind Old Tucson, which is sort of on the outskirts of town, that the Paramount logo is based on. They like
Mm.
added snow to it. But that's how many films were
You mean
filmed
it's
in
not
Tucson,
based on
Arizona.
the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark
I'm
when
so sorry to tell you that it's not. And I invite you here someday, as soon as you've gotten your fill of Tulsa. My husband is a Tulsan, so I've had the privilege of going many times to the Bob Dylan Museum, the Bob Dylan Center. But someday you should come and see this place because when you get it from the right angle, it's quite. You're like, oh my god, it's totally the Paramount Mountain. Like
my
it's very
God.
clear. But so many westerns were filmed here, and so that's the place I grew up in. I
Right.
grew up in this place that was totally steeped in this Western mythology. I don't even know how real a lot of it was, but the
Mm.
mythology of it was very real to me.
Hmm.
And so the beginning of his sort of monologuing to Cameron Crowe, I'm like, oh, it doesn't surprise me that I picked this song.
Yeah.
This speaks to my whole like worldview and experience.
Well, you mentioned film. The song seems, very cinematic. Do you see your writing in a cinematic way? And has film played a role in your writing?
For sure. I actually think Olive Days is very cinematic. I also
Mhm.
got my career started in film. The first part of my career was actually at a major motion picture production company
Mhm.
in Hollywood. And I loved the industry. And there are many things I love about it. In the end,
Mhm.
after I stayed home for a few years raising young children, I was like, oh, I want to work in the nonprofit field. But I loved working in film.
Mm.
I don't write my fiction with sort of an eye towards cinema. I think instead that's just sort of what lives like my natural metronome for storytelling.
Mhm.
I will tell you a slightly sad story. Not that anybody has the right to option their work. Not that I'm extremely privileged as it is, but there was this period of time when the most recent writer's strike ended before October 7th. My book wasn't on the market yet, and I have a set of agents looking to sell the rights, and there was a lot of interest. And then October 7th happened, and it just
Yeah.
disappeared. Now, who's to say I would have like sold to Netflix? I don't know, but
I could see
but
Olive Days
yeah,
as
yes, a
a as an
mini series or
HBO series for sure.
for
I
sure,
would
for
watch the hell
sure,
out of
for sure.
that.
And the great news is, I actually an earlier draft of the book went every other chapter will read it. Not great in the end for a book, but I would happily sell that cutting room floor material on Will to anybody who'd like to make it. But I do think, I grew up in the West. I'm steeped in Hollywood. I worked in Hollywood.
Mhm.
I watch great TV, very little of it, but I like to think what I watch is great. I I think in cinematic terms, and I actually think many of Bob's songs are cinematic. This
Mhm.
is a particular example,
Mhm.
though. I mean, you
Mhm.
can see it's so easy for this to come to life in your mind's eye.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm picturing Bob from Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid as the narrator singing this song. Like,
Yes,
it's that version of him for sure. Like you said, this song's been covered many times. Calexico, the most famous probably Jerry Garcia band, and Douglas
not my
Brink.
favorite.
Really? Oh, hold on to that.
Okay, all right, all
That's a
right,
hot take. That's a hot take on this call.
okay.
Um, Douglas Brinkley said in Mixing Up the Medicine book, I once asked Dylan which covers of the song he most admired. At first, he shrugged off the question, just nodded off that line of thought. But then, in I guess sort of fashion, he reluctantly offered Jimi Hendrix's Watchtower, the
Mm,
Jerry Garcia's band Señor, Tales of Yankee Power. And then he goes on Johnny Winter's Highway 61, Nina Simone's Just Like a Woman, which is amazing.
yes.
And then he turned slightly annoyed when I ventured down that highway of inquiry, which I just think is so funny. Like, first of all, the chutzpah to ask Bob Dylan, which covers of your
I would
songs do you like
never.
the
I
most,
would never.
But I mean, that's great.
Um,
I mean, good on Douglas Brinkley because a big part of
sure.
Bob Dylan is the covers, right? And certainly, he loved Jerry so much. So you're not a fan of the Jerry version.
No, but now I have to just get this out there that my favorite Dylan cover of all times will also be a controversial take, and it's
Ooh,
Jason and the Scorchers cover of Absolutely Sweet Marie, which is
okay.
better than any other version and just like
Better than
amazing. And
George
if you have it
Harrison version from Bob Fest.
better, you're gonna have a
Okay.
great day tomorrow rocking out to this hillbilly version of Absolutely Sweet Marie. I don't listen, it's just too long. And
Mm,
that, I will say, to be fair, is how I react to many. I'm like my mom with Bob Dylan on Jerry Garcia. I'm like,
okay.
there's a lot to recommend him, and I really like some of his songs. And
Okay, fair
I,
enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
it's just too
This is
long for
not a
me.
Grateful Dead podcast, but so
Yeah,
you
great, great, great. It's just too long for me, and I don't think it gives a lot of space for like incredible vocals. Whereas I think the Willie Nelson version, it's a great song for Willie Nelson
Oh
because it
yeah.
brings out all of the most beautiful parts of his voice.
Oh yeah.
So it's just not my favorite. I don't hate it though. I don't hate any cover of this song. It's just not my favorite.
Fair enough. So the last two parts of the song, Señor, Señor, you know their hearts is as hard as leather. Well, give me a minute, let me get it together. I just gotta pick myself up off the floor. I'm ready when you are, Señor. Señor, Señor, let's disconnect these cables, overturn these tables. This place don't make sense to me no more. Can you tell me what we're waiting for, Señor? So a lot to unpack here, throwing a lot at you. Is hearts as hard as leather? Is that a euphemism that Bob made up, or is that a thing?
So have you ever heard this anywhere else before? I've never
No,
heard this before. But now
not
now
before
I'm
or
gonna
since.
find out that there are like 1,000. I don't know. But I've never heard it before. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a Bob thing.
I don't even think of leather as a hard thing. I mean, I know it's like sturdy and useful and versatile.
Hard to cut through. Hard to
Uh-huh.
cut through.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe,
Okay. Yeah.
maybe. But right, I don't think of leather
I think of
as
it as like
inherently
soft and like smooth
right.
and pretty. So
Right.
that's
Although it's a song of the American West, and where
leather
leather
is
is used
yeah.
in the West is right in horseback riding. It's used in almost every element of battle, and the all of the stuff that you use to ride a horse is all made from leather.
But then he goes through this sort of in real time getting up thing. Like,
Yeah.
give me a minute, let me get it together. Okay, now I've picked myself up and I'm ready. We sort of
Yeah.
are with him along for this, whatever he's going through
Yes.
in real time, which doesn't seem to connect, at least to me, their hearts is as hard as leather. Who is he talking about? And what happened to him in between those two lines before, well, give me a
Right.
minute.
Right. Because the last three lines of this verse are actually the three most relatable lines of the whole song. I think everybody can relate to, well, give me a minute, let me get it
Hmm.
together. Like, just let me pick myself up on the floor. I'm ready when you are. I think this is like a universal human experience
It's
and the
so
most
personal.
relatable and least dreamy of the entire song. But like, what does this first line mean? Um,
Any
and
ideas, Jessica?
yeah, I mean, I think that he's expressing that there's a lack of empathy in the place that he finds himself in.
Mm.
Um, right? Like he wants empathy in some way for the
Mm.
experience he's having, for the romantic problems he's having, for whatever existential crisis he might be in, perhaps for not feeling so good because he's in some sort of drug induced state, for any number of reasons. He may be seeking empathy. He may have just experienced something as right, like before I stripped and kneeled.
Hmm.
Like nobody cares.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I experienced that line.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of how I feel when I listen to this song. Like, give me a minute. I got to pick myself together,
Truly,
you know?
truly, I actually often pause when I have this song on a
Mm,
playlist and it goes right into the next song. I often pause it at the end
mm,
because it's too much. Like,
hmm. Then, so disconnect these cables. This is like if you're a rock star, as he has been for at this point for the last, um, let's say almost 20 years, right? Like 19
20,
years, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
more than 20. Yeah.
yeah. Like that seems like a very like a thing he would know about disconnecting cables. But again, doesn't fit in. It's kind of like the dragon doesn't really fit in with this Western motif. You know,
And
it's
this is a place where people are like, "Oh, well, that's about Pete Seeger,"
oh, for
and they
fuck's
were gonna,
sake, no,
and I'm like,
come
"Shut the fuck up!" Right.
on.
And then I'm like, am I just as bad because I think that the overturn these tables are about Jesus at the temple? Maybe I'm just as bad. But right,
I don't know.
but
That seems pretty overt to me.
just generally the idea of disconnecting cables, like on going off the grid,
Mm,
maybe, and
hmm.
then you could maybe connect it a little bit more to the west. Like, actually, I live in this place now. Is sort of how I feel that line.
Mm,
I'm gonna untangle myself from what came before. Like, you're a weird dude with fire coming out of your eyes, and I live
mm,
here now. That's
hmm.
sort of how I experienced that line.
Wow. I mean, yeah, maybe he's disconnecting himself, like you said, going off the grid. I mean, that certainly kind of is what happens to him in his next era, to borrow
For
a
sure.
Taylor Swift line, like like that going into that Christian period, that era, like he disconnects himself from basically everyone that isn't a part of that thing.
Yeah, and I think coming off the divorce, right?
Hmm.
Divorce is hard, and this divorce was particularly hard, and you
Yeah.
see it first in like Rolling Thunder Review, and then I do think that he's in a process, and then he just at some point goes out on the road forever.
Mm.
That's a very strange way to live. It's so disconnected from. He was a very hands-on stay-at-home dad, and
Mm.
you hear reports that actually he is still quite close to his children and
Hmm.
grandchildren,
Totally.
and he's right, right, totally.
Jacob
But
said as
also
much even recently.
yes,
So,
but he travels all the time. He never goes back to the life he had when his children were young, when his first set of children were young.
right.
And I do think that there's sort of a period of time for him of disconnecting
Yeah.
cases.
Well, I think that's actually really important that you mention it. And I wanted to talk about it at the beginning when we were talking about sort of the statistics of this song because it's it's really important to think about what was going on when street legal happened. So he's coming, there were like a bunch of different things that happened all at the same time. So in Rolling Thunder Review, in the first part, like they've kind of reconciled, right? After Blood on the Tracks and he and Sarah, and she's in Ronaldo and Clara. And then he makes Ronaldo and Clara, spends so much time, months and months and months editing it, releases it, it bombs.
Catastrophe.
And the divorce papers basically are finalized in 77. She wants to take the kids to Hawaii or something. He goes to Minnesota for a little bit. I mean, there's just a lot
Yeah.
happening at this time. And so I think that's where, and then all of a sudden he just like randomly puts together this rundown studio and says, calls
Right.
all these great musicians and then
Right.
boom, gives you like brilliance, like you said,
Right.
sneezing brilliance. So I think like the disconnecting of him from reality, humanity, family, whatever it is, I think is really important in this moment when this song is happening.
I totally agree. And I also always think that if Bob ever listens to interviews like this, he's probably like, fuck them,
You don't know shit. Yeah.
right. But I agree with your assessment,
Yeah.
Henry.
I guess I'm not trying to like,
No,
psychoanalyze Bob
I know you're
completely,
not, but
but I do think knowing all of those factors and like I couldn't handle all of that.
right,
And his reaction to all of that deeply personal stuff is street legal. Like
right.
that's insane. Even if if this song, if just this song, right, Dayenu, it would have been enough.
Yeah,
But
right,
the whole rest of the album. And
right.
so I think that disconnecting of the cables from sort of reality is amazing. But if we are gonna not go into like the Jesus overturning the tables in the temple thing, what would you say that line is referencing then?
Like
Just like mixing it up.
I think, yeah, like right, exactly. Like what came before
Mhm.
is doesn't matter. I'm like ready to change everything.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. I think that's the more basic reading of of this.
And then he admits that it doesn't make sense to him no more, but as if it did earlier in the song. Like,
Right. But maybe he couldn't say that earlier in the
Mm,
song. And that's
mm.
like my writerly take. Is at the beginning
Okay.
it didn't make sense, but he was trying to make sense of it, and now he can say like, I don't know.
And then
Yeah.
it ends, like you said, in a very unsatisfying way that
But very Jewish way with a
yes,
question.
with a question. Yes. That's sort of like that eternal, also Jewish question too. Like, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting
What
for,
Mashiach?
yeah, are we waiting for the
Yes, what are we
Messiah?
waiting
Like,
for? What's
yeah,
the idea? Yes.
yeah, what's coming? And I think that's not just Jewish, it's like a universal question, right? What does it all mean? What is the point of it? What is it? What purpose does it
Right.
serve?
It's extremely existential. This song ends on, I mean, I think the whole song is pretty existential, but it ends on like a very existential, no resolution note, which I love.
Is there anything else about Señor or Bob Dylan in general that you'd like to say?
I mean, I don't know. I want to say I feel like I could talk about him forever. And yet when you invited me to be on this podcast, I was like, what do I have to say,
Well, we've been going on
about Bob
about an
Dylan?
hour, so you had
Yeah,
plenty.
yeah, yeah. Right, right, right. Well, it turns out I have a lot to say about everything. The
Yeah.
question is it relevant?
Yeah.
No, I think this was an outstanding diagnosis of Señor.
Great. I agree. I have an exit question for you. I don't do this all the time, it's just every now and then we'll talk about where folks can find you and such. Your exit question is you can have the soundtrack to whatever your adaptation of Olive Days is written by either Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen.
Oh my God.
You have to choose one.
Okay. That's
Original
horrible.
soundtrack.
That's horrible. My inclination on Olive Days. Oh, that's terrible. My inclination on Olive Days is Bob Dylan, but then I'm like, ooh, but Leonard Cohen really knows LA,
And then
you know?
Leonard Cohen is obsessed with sex. So
Right, and obsessive love, and it's a very like right people. I sort of disagree with this assessment. People go like Leonard Cohen songs are what you commit suicide to, and there are some sad
Whoa.
pieces of all of these. But also Bob Dylan knows Los Angeles, and I'm not
Yeah.
super proud of it. But right after my first child was born, my first child Noam, who's 21 now and like studying abroad in Japan, I had some time to just push him around in a stroller. And it may be that sometimes I would drive to Santa Monica and push him around a block where there was a boxing gym where I heard maybe someday I might run into Bob Dylan. And I don't know what I would have done if I did. Probably nothing. I don't like to bother people. I'm
Mm.
not kind of introverted. I just would have been like, yay.
I saw him.
Um, right. And because the book I'm writing now is very clearly tied into more of a sort of Leonard Cohen folklore.
Mm,
I'm gonna
mm.
go I'm gonna go with Bob Dylan, but that is super hard.
I'll be honest with you, it came to me while we were talking. So I
I
I
love
didn't I
it.
didn't prepare that one. You inspired the question. So
I
where
haven't looked at the playlist that I made for all of these to see is there more of one or the other, actually. I haven't. That would be interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So, where can folks find you if they want to talk about Bob Dylan, or, where can we buy your
Yeah.
book Olive Days, if there's anything else
I'm
you want to say
I'm
about it?
very thank you for asking. I'm very findable at elishevaemerson.com. That I publish under my name Jessica Elisheva Emerson, which is my birth name. And I'm just lucky that my parents gave me a very Jewish middle name because otherwise Jessica Emerson doesn't signal much. But they can find me at elishevaemerson.com. And my book All of Days is available. I'm so lucky. My publisher Counterpoint has made it available absolutely everywhere that you buy books. And every book sale counts, but also libraries are amazing, and it's there too.
All right, one more question. Your real exit question.
Okay,
You haven't released the audiobook version yet, I
it's
noticed.
coming.
I know.
Okay.
It says coming soon. So if you could pick either Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen to read the audio version, let's say in this fantasy Leonard Cohen is
Oh yeah,
alive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sorry to say this on a Bob Dylan podcast, but
It's
Leonard
okay.
Cohen much more intelligible. Just
Yeah.
and has a pretty good voice for the sexy parts. So
Absolutely.
I would
Absolutely.
say I would say Leonard Cohen. But to be fair, only one of them could still read it. So
Right.
that's a big
So
point for Bob Dylan.
default. That's the new season of Theme Time Radio Hour will be that. So anyway, thank you so much, Jessica. This was
Thank
great.
you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Look for the next episode on the 15th day of the month in all of your podcast feeds. You can give me a follow on Blue Sky at Henry Bernstein. If you're subscribing to Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to give us a rating and a review. For a video version of this podcast, please visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/at Songs of Bob Dylan. You can email us at songsofbobdylan@gmail.com. Thank you to my friend and mentor Rob Kelly for designing our fabulous logo, and to my mandolin teacher Mark Mitchell from the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago. Lastly, if you would like to help support the cost of hosting my podcasts, go to patreon.com/gonzo3249. For $5, I'll show my gratitude by giving you a shout out. So thank you to Rob Kelly, Roberta Rakove, Matt Simonson, Josh Taft, and Christopher Vani. For $10, I'll also send you a surprise piece of vintage Bob Dylan merch. So thank you to the girl from the North Country, Katie Sorovic. Thank you to Mark Godfrey over on Substack. You folks make the show happen. Truly, I love y'all. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.